It was the kind of morning that didn't seem special at first glance. The sun was just beginning to peek through the blinds, casting a soft glow across the room. John, an ordinary man with an ordinary life, stretched and yawned as he woke up. His routine was well established. The same alarm buzzing, the same coffee brewing, the same half-sleepy shuffle into the kitchen. Everything felt familiar, like any other day, but something was different this time. John couldn't quite place it, but the air felt charged, as though the universe was holding its breath, waiting for something to unfold. He brushed it off as a figment of his imagination, a fleeting feeling that would soon vanish with the routine of his day. Yet deep down, there was a nagging sense that something extraordinary was just around the corner. As he went through his day, the world seemed a little brighter, a little more vibrant. His colleagues were unusually cheerful, and even his boss, who typically greeted him with a stern look, offered a rare smile. John's morning coffee, usually just a necessity to get through the day, tasted richer than ever. It wasn't anything he could explain. It was as if the mundane was somehow filled with a quiet promise. Throughout the day, little things happened that stood out in a way they never had before. He bumped into an old friend he hadn't seen in years while waiting in line at the grocery store. This reunion turned into a long conversation that led to a new business opportunity he had never anticipated. Later, he discovered that the mysterious envelope that had been sitting on his desk for weeks, untouched, contained an unexpected sum of money he desperately needed. But it wasn't just the external events that were strange. It was the way everything felt. The world seemed to bend slightly, as though John was standing on the edge of something much larger than his day-to-day existence. It was as if the universe was showing him signs, hints that something important was about to happen. By the time nightfall arrived, John lay in bed reflecting on the odd yet extraordinary events of the day. He felt a strange sense of anticipation, as though the universe was preparing him for something. It was in the stillness of the night, with his eyes closed and his mind adrift, that he would soon find himself pulled into a dream that would change his life forever. A peaceful night's rest. That evening, as the day's events replayed in John's mind, he couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of gratitude. The overwhelming sense of luck that had been with him all day, unexpected opportunities, small, almost magical encounters, made him feel both grateful and puzzled. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, as if searching for some deeper meaning behind the strange sequence of events. It all felt like a sign, a gesture from something bigger than himself. But what was it really trying to tell him? It had been years since John had had a chance to pause and reflect on his life. In fact, he couldn't remember the last time he felt such gratitude. It was almost as if the universe had given him a second chance, a new perspective on the life he was living. His job, which he had grown tired of, now seemed to have possibilities. The relationships in his life, which had often seemed shallow, suddenly seemed more meaningful. Even his own purpose, once vague and surrounded by routine, now seemed like it could be something bigger. Despite the many questions swirling around in his mind, John felt a calmness come over him. There was no worry, no restlessness. For the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. His body relaxed in the warmth of his bed, the soft weight of the blankets making him feel safe, as if nothing could disturb the peace of this moment. And yet, beneath this calmness, there was a deep undercurrent, something much more profound that he couldn't name, a sense of anticipation. It was like standing on the edge of a great unknown, waiting for something important to happen. He had no idea what was going to happen, but somehow in the pit of his stomach, he was sure that whatever it was, it would change him. It was a strange feeling, almost as if he had crossed some invisible threshold, and now there was no way back. As he closed his eyes, he said a simple prayer, one he hadn't said in years, not out of habit, but out of a deep, instinctive gratitude. "Thank you," he murmured quietly into the darkness, not just for the good fortune he had received that day, but for the peace that had descended upon him, the kind of peace he had almost forgotten. And as his mind calmed and his breathing slowed, he fell asleep, unsure of what the night would bring, but feeling strangely certain that something was going to happen. In the dead of night, John found himself in a place he didn't recognize, standing alone in the vastness of an endless desert. The air was still, heavy with silence, and all he could hear was the sound of his own breath, shallow and uncertain. The desert stretched out in every direction, an ocean of sand that seemed to go on forever. The sky above was unlike anything he had ever seen, so dark it felt as though the universe itself was holding its breath. But at the same time, the stars burned brighter than any he had ever witnessed. It was as if the heavens themselves had opened up to reveal a deep, unfathomable truth. John was confused. How had he ended up here? Why was he in this desolate, otherworldly place? His heart pounded in his chest, each beat heavy with the weight of an unspoken question. But before he could gather his thoughts or understand the situation, something shifted in the distance. A figure began to materialize from the edge of the desert, moving toward him through the dark expanse. At first, John thought it was just a mirage, a trick of the mind, but as the figure drew closer, there was no mistaking it. This was real. The man was clothed in simple white robes, his presence radiating a serene but powerful energy. His face was calm, with eyes that seemed to pierce through John's very soul, seeing him in a way no one ever had. There was a quiet strength in the man's gaze, a knowing, as though he understood everything about John's life, his struggles, and the questions that had always lingered in his heart. The closer the figure came, the more John felt an overwhelming sense of peace flood over him, replacing the confusion and fear that had initially gripped him. John's heart raced, but not from fear. He felt an undeniable pull, a deep recognition of who this figure was. It wasn't just that he knew who this was, it was something far deeper, something ancient and profound. It was Jesus. Tears welled up in John's eyes as he fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the moment. The air around him seemed to shimmer with the power of the encounter, yet there was an inexplicable calmness within him, as if he had just met someone he had known forever. His thoughts scattered, his mind unable to fully comprehend what was happening. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. He was speechless, utterly humbled by the presence before him. Everything he thought he knew about life, faith, and the world around him suddenly felt small and insignificant in comparison to the weight of this moment. In the desert, under the stars, John knelt in awe and reverence, not fully understanding, but feeling as though he had been touched by something beyond human comprehension. As John knelt there, overwhelmed by Jesus' presence, a peaceful silence descended around them. Jesus looked at him with eyes that saw not just the surface of his life, but every hidden corner of his heart. There was a deep compassion in his gaze, an understanding that made John feel seen and understood in a way he had never experienced before. It was as if Jesus knew everything about him, his fears, his doubts, his hopes, and the loneliness he had repressed for years. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The desert moved forward, the stars twinkling above as if waiting. And then, in a voice that was both gentle and firm, Jesus spoke. "You have been given many blessings," he said, his words soft but carrying a weight that John could feel in his bones. "But you have also been given a choice." John's mind began to race. His heart was still pounding, and he struggled to understand what was happening. Was this the luck he had experienced the previous day? Was that what Jesus was referring to? unexpected opportunities, strange turns of events, moments of good fortune that had come his way. John had thought of it as just a coincidence, a series of coincidences, but now he wondered, was it something more, something divine? The luck you experienced today was a sign, a reminder of what you could have. But with it comes responsibility, Jesus said, his voice steady and knowing. These words shook John. He had never considered that the good things that were happening in his life could also be a burden. He had taken everything for granted, never questioning why things were happening the way he couldn't explain. Now, standing before Jesus, he realized that maybe it wasn't just a coincidence, it was something deeper, something that was meant to guide him. John was confused, his mind spinning with questions. He wanted to ask what all of this meant, what he should do with this new awareness, but before he could find the words, Jesus spoke again. "You have lost your way," Jesus said, his voice full of kindness, yet with an urgency. "But there is a greater purpose waiting for you. Will you seek it out, or will you continue to live a life of chance?" John's heart thumped. Was this the choice he had to make? Was he to live in ignorance, just drifting through life, waiting for things to happen to him? Or was there something more? Something he needed to seek out? Something that required his active participation? The weight of the question hung in the air between them, and John felt a stirring in his soul, a deep desire to understand what this purpose might be. As the words echoed in his mind, he realized that his life had been shaped by chance, by things beyond his control, but now, for the first time, he realized there was something more to it, something he could choose, something he could become. Before John could gather his thoughts or respond to the powerful words Jesus spoke, something extraordinary happened. The ground beneath him seemed to shake, and the desert that had once stretched endlessly before him vanished. In an instant, he found himself standing in a grand, opulent hall. The place was enormous, stretching far beyond what his eyes could see. Everywhere he looked, there was wealth beyond imagination. Mountains of gold, glittering jewels, priceless artifacts, and treasures that seemed to glow with an almost magical light. The abundance of it all left him breathless for a few moments. In the middle of the room, hanging in the air, was a sphere. It glowed with an intense, pulsating light that drew him toward it, as if it contained the essence of all the riches in the world. Power emanated from the sphere, and John felt its pull deep within him. It was everything he had ever dreamed of, a life free of worry, full of success, comfort, and endless possibilities. It seemed so simple, so desirable. A loud voice echoed in his mind, its tone deep and commanding. "Choose. The riches of the world are yours, but they come with a price, or you can seek the unknown path which requires faith." John's heart was beating fast in his chest as he grasped the enormity of what lay before him. The riches, the fame, the luxury, the life of leisure were so breathtaking. He could almost taste them. All the things he had always wanted, the dreams he had suppressed under the weight of his responsibilities and doubts, were now within his reach. He could take them, claim them as his own, and never have to worry again. It seemed like the obvious choice, the path that would solve all his problems and fulfill his every desire. And yet, as he stood there staring at that sphere, something stirred deep inside him. An instinct, a feeling that warned him that this was no simple decision. It wasn't just about money versus faith. There was much more going on here. This was a test of something much bigger. It was a test of his soul, a choice that would define who he was and what he truly valued. The money would come, but it would not be free. The cost of it was something he didn't yet fully understand, but it felt like it would change him in ways he wasn't ready for. John stood frozen, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He felt the tension between what he wanted and what he knew deep down that he needed. It wasn't just a choice of material wealth, it was a choice of character, faith, and belief. The path before him seemed clear, yet filled with uncertainty. Would he take the easy, lucrative path to riches, or would he step into the unknown, a path that required faith and something deeper? The decision wasn't just about what he would gain. It was about what he would lose, and what he might gain instead. John stood still, unable to move, as the weight of the decision pressed heavily on his chest. The world around him, the treasures, the orb, the shimmering gold, seemed so inviting, so perfect. The possibilities were endless, and for a moment he wondered if he should take it all. It was everything he had ever dreamed of, everything that he had worked toward in his life, even if he hadn't realized it until now. The allure of comfort, security, and power were tempting, pulling at him with an intensity he couldn't ignore. But just as he was about to reach out for the orb, the image of Jesus returned to him. It wasn't in the form of words or a voice. It was in the unspoken presence that filled the space, the love that radiated from his eyes. Jesus didn't need to say anything. His gaze was enough. John felt it deeply. The unconditional love, the understanding that was beyond anything human. It was the kind of gaze that knew John completely, saw into the very essence of who he was. It was as though Jesus was offering him not just a choice, but an opportunity to see the truth of his life in a new light. In that moment, something shifted inside John. The realization hit him with such force that it almost took his breath away. The luck he had experienced over the past day, the surprising opportunities, the sudden windfall of good fortune, wasn't random at all. It wasn't just a series of fortunate coincidences that had fallen into place. It was a sign, a message, a call to something much greater than himself. It wasn't the universe handing him a shortcut to a life of wealth and ease. It was a moment of realignment, an invitation to reconnect with a deeper purpose, a purpose that wasn't defined by material success or the fleeting pleasures of life. John understood in that quiet, powerful instant that if he chose the path of wealth, he would be choosing the easy road. It was tempting, yes, but it came at a cost that he couldn't ignore. He realized that he would lose something far more valuable. His soul's true purpose, the very essence of why he was here. The treasures around him, the wealth and power, would all fade eventually. But the purpose he could find through faith, through seeking a life of meaning, would be eternal. The choice wasn't just about wealth versus faith. It was about who he was going to become. Would he take what the world offered, or would he seek something deeper, something lasting? In that quiet moment, John knew that the true path lay not in the riches of the world, but in the quiet, unseen treasures of the soul. And he knew, with all his heart, that he had to choose the path that would allow him to rediscover who he truly was. As John stood in the grand hall, the temptation of the riches before him almost overwhelmed him. The orb pulsed with a light so brilliant, the wealth surrounding him gleamed with promises of all his desires fulfilled. It was everything he had ever dreamed of: luxury, comfort, and an escape from the struggles of his everyday life. But then, like a flash of clarity, the image of Jesus returned to his mind. The love in his eyes was unwavering, full of understanding, yet there was a quiet challenge in that gaze. It wasn't a judgment, but a nudge, a reminder of the deeper truth that John had already begun to sense in his heart. In that moment, John knew what he had to do. The allure of the treasures was real, but it wasn't what he truly needed. He didn't need the fleeting comforts of wealth. What he craved was something deeper, something that would nourish his soul and lead him to the purpose he was meant to fulfill. With a final breath, John reached out, not toward the orb, not toward the wealth that could so easily be his, but toward something more lasting. He closed his eyes and whispered, almost to himself, "I choose faith." The moment those words left his lips, the entire scene began to shift. The treasures, the gold, the jewels, all of it vanished as quickly as it had appeared, dissolving into the air like mist. The grand hall was gone, replaced once again by the vast, quiet desert. The stillness was comforting, not empty, but full of purpose. Standing before him once again was Jesus, his eyes warm with approval, his expression soft but knowing. Jesus placed a hand gently on John's shoulder, a gesture of love and reassurance. "You have chosen wisely," he said, his voice calm yet filled with a quiet strength. "Your path will not be easy, but it will be true." John felt the weight of those words settle into his soul. The path ahead wouldn't be without struggle, but he knew, without a doubt, that it was the right one. This choice, this commitment to faith, would guide him forward in ways he couldn't yet fully understand. But it felt right. It felt like the beginning of something real, something profound. As the dream began to fade and the image of Jesus slowly disappeared, John woke up with a start. His heart raced in his chest, but it wasn't out of fear. It was out of an overwhelming sense of peace, a peace he had never known before. The clarity from his dream lingered in the quiet moments as he lay in his bed, his mind still processing everything that had just occurred. He knew with a certainty that went beyond words that his life would never be the same. The luck he had experienced over the past day wasn't just chance. It was a divine intervention, a call to realign his life with a deeper purpose. And now, with a renewed sense of direction, he was ready to follow the path of faith.